Hey, can y'all hear me?
We can hear you
Yes,
just
sir.
fine.
Hey. Of course. Hello to everybody. I just appreciate what everybody's doing. I think Ken was referring to the things I put up in about the merging and the moving,
Yep.
and that was so to look at what's happening in the city. Um, when they were talking, you guys were talking Wednesday night about the attempt to merge us under Mason.
Right.
What people don't realize was that was the fourth time that had happened in our history.
Wow.
So, and then what I forgot to add, Ken, was not only was that the fourth time, I'm gonna go all the way back to 1920. So
Mm.
if you go back to 1920, there was actually a bill by a white senator, and I forget his name, but this white senator actually became a one-term governor. When he was a senator in 1920, he actually proposed a bill to move the University of Mississippi to Jackson.
Mm.
So at least since 1920, we have evidence that they've either wanted Ole Miss in Jackson or they've wanted Jackson State to become the University of Mississippi at Jackson. And so we'll walk through those four times. And what you have to understand is that Mississippi, and I want to say Alabama, and you can correct me on this because I can never remember the other state. We are the only there's only two states that doesn't have a PWI in its capital city. And so you have to understand that with the other 50 states, there's a major PWI in their capital city. So it was always a plan to somehow make Jackson State the University of Mississippi at Jackson, going back to that 1920 legislation. Now let's go through those four times they wanted us to move.
Hmm.
What people forget is when we first moved from Natchez Seminary to Jackson, we were located exactly where Millsaps College is located. That was the original place. And the reason Millsaps is called the Millsaps Majors, because it was founded by Major Millsaps, who was a major in the Confederate Army. He fought in the Civil War to retain slavery. So one of the founders of Millsaps fought in the Civil War. He was a major in the Civil War. They attempted on two or three separate times to buy the school out. That is, they took money and they said, "Hey, here, take these coins. We need you out the city," because at that time the city was trying to expand, and so Jackson was in the way of the expansion, economic development. So why do they want you out the way? As what Ken was saying about gentrification, they wanted us off State Street because they didn't want us to reap or be in the way of economic development. So after second or third attempt, it was both money and threat of physical violence. So it wasn't just money, it was also money and threat of physical violence. We would then move to where we are now. But where we are now was not the city of Jackson. It was called Gowdy, Mississippi. So if you leave Jackson State, well, actually, you can't do it anymore because of the roundabout. So Ken
Right.
and Rochelle will know there was a time when you could leave Jackson State on Lynch Street and you can make a left on Valley. You can no longer make a left on Valley. But if ever on Valley Street, there's a sign that says, "Welcome to Washington Addition neighborhood, formerly Gowdy, Mississippi." Now check this out about the hypocrisy. So that was the very first time they moved us from State Street to where we are now. We were a thriving working class black community. We were making dollars. And when they realized, oh, we can't let you Negroes have that money to yourself, they annexed us back into the city. So that is how Gowdy, Mississippi became Washington Addition, became part of Jackson, is because they added. So you kick us off State Street because you don't want us to be part of economic development. And then when we become sovereign, economically independent beings, you annex us back into the city so you can take our taxes. So that was the first time. The second time, and that time is there's a sister who's a professor at Jackson State. That's documented in her book, Dr. Leela Gaston Rose. I'm trying to remember the title of her book. And that book is actually, Dr. Leela Gaston Rose's book is out of print, but it's in the actual reserve section of the library. So you can go to the reserve section. It's called The History of Jackson State from 1877 to shoot, I can't remember, but it's a history of Jackson State from 1877 by Dr. Liegh McInnis. And so you can go to the reserve section of the library and get that. The second time was in the 70s. And Dr. Peoples describes this in his book, To Survive and Thrive. If you are a Jackson State graduate, you should have both of Dr. Peoples' books, but you should definitely have his book, To Survive and Thrive. And when I read this, you talk about some mafioso stuff. Some white folk from IHL showed up like gangsters, put Dr. Peoples in a car and drove him into a remote area of Hinds County and essentially said, we'll let you have all this out here if you'll be willing to move from where you are. Because remember, as they annexed the city back in, the other side of Jackson was white. So technically, even though they annexed Washington Addition, Gowdy, the other side of it across Lynch Street, that was all white. So everything Lynch Street going back to Capitol Street, that was a white neighborhood. So they wanted us gone again. So they said, move out to Hinds County. And Dr. Peoples is a strong brother because of a bunch of mafioso white dudes put me in a car and drove me out into a remote part of Hinds County where they were still lynching black folks. And he said, if Dr. Peoples said, we like where we are, please take me back to the campus. That's in his book. So if you want to go, look that up. So that was the second time. The third time was under Dr. Lyons.
Mm-hmm.
Under Dr. Lyons is when the first time they actually put the merger in print. And what they were going to do is, someone said they were going to close Valley. Sadly, they actually weren't going to close Valley. They were going to turn Valley into a prison. They were going to turn Valley into a prison. They were going to then hand over Alcorn to Mississippi State. But here's the problem with that. That's illegal because Alcorn is the oldest 16th section land grant college in the nation. There's not an older land grant college in the nation than Alcorn. Now check this out. Alcorn is the reason Mississippi State exists. Because Alcorn is older than Mississippi State. And when they created Alcorn as a farming school for black people, the white farmers couldn't go to Ole Miss because Ole Miss was created for white doctors and lawyers who were also going to be politicians. In fact, white women couldn't even go to Ole Miss. That's why you had the W. In fact, the W was originally created. Check this out. The W was created to teach women how to be good wives to doctors, lawyers, and politicians. In fact, the only major you could get originally at the W was homemaking. So when they developed Alcorn, the white, the white working class people was like, where the hell is our school? How come the black people? And I give white people credit for this. What they did was they started siphoning money, stealing, but I'm going to say siphoning money and putting away money so that when they opened Mississippi State, even though Alcorn is older than Mississippi State opened with more money than Alcorn. So they were going to give give Alcorn to Mississippi State, and they were going to make Jackson the University of Mississippi at Jackson. And what happened is that there were two rallies. Both rallies started at Jackson State, and we marched from Jackson State to the Capitol, two different marches, and it was 20,000 strong totaling both marches, and it was people from HBCU from all over. I actually participated in both marches. They rained on us the second time, and look, I'm gonna go on and tell myself, if you go to my page, your brother Ken, I've had every hairdo, so that was my perm days. So it rained on my perm, so the gel I had was slicked down on the side. All my gel ran down on my white. I had never have on a white shirt with that. And Sister Rochelle and Sister Kayla may know what I'm talking about. I used to have that Ampro gel. That Ampro gel was that good gel, boy. That gel there, boy, was you couldn't tell me I wasn't Prince with that Ampro gel slicked down on the side. So because of that pressure, Lions backed up. Now check this out. What happened with Lions was that you also then had the Ayers case happening around that time. I actually testified as an instructor in the Ayers case in the federal court in Oxford. When the case went to the Supreme Court twice. Alvin Chambers, This is a name for you, Ken. You and Zoe can research his name. Alvin Chambers was the attorney for Jackson State who won at the Supreme Court level, who also played football at Jackson State. Alvin Chambers won. So what happened is that when we went to the Supreme Court both times, the Supreme Court said the black colleges are right. You have purpose because we need to be clear about what the Ayers case was about. The Ayers case was about we have met the benchmarks and you still didn't give us our money. Every time a school hits certain benchmarks, you're supposed to give them money. But no matter how many benchmarks Jackson State, Alcorn, and Valley would hit, we wouldn't get our money. So the Supreme Court was like on its face. So there were 13 things. So the Supreme Court said, y'all are right. But remember, Scalia was the head of that Supreme Court. So it was a conservative court. So, and it was about states' rights. So Scalia said that y'all have proved y'all point, but we're going to remand the case back to the state a third time. And if y'all don't settle it and it comes back a third time, we're going to then have these 13 things in place. And check it out. Those 13 things that were in place, three of them was Jackson State should get an engineering school, Jackson State should get a law school, and Jackson State should have joint control of UMC admissions. Now, here's why that's important. And here's why having control of your president. Remember I said that Lyons was down with the merger, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we went to Oxford, the hearings in Oxford was not about whether or not the Supreme Court said is right. It was about what's the best way to do those 13 things. So it wasn't, should we do them? It was what's the best way to give Jackson State an engineering school? What's the best way to give Jackson State a law school? What's the best way to give Jackson State some control over admissions at UMC? Our own president, President Lyons, got on the stand and said, Jackson State is incapable of managing these types of programs. And Judge Neil Biggers, one of the most racist judges that we've ever had, wrote and said, Jackson State's own president said it cannot handle these programs. And for doing that, for selling us out, Lyons got a presidency, I want to say somewhere in California, like San Diego State or something. Like he got a presidency somewhere else. So that was the third time. The fourth time that this came up again was under Mason. And it was again, they came to Mason and they said, look, we want to merge these schools. And of course, Mason, now, if you, what I'm about to say about Mason, all you got to do is Google my name and Mason, Google Liegh McInnis and Mason. I published this article because I published an article when we had a president who named Bynum and embarrassed us. And I wrote a lengthy article about how we've had terrible presidents because IHL picks our presidents and not us. And the whole point is that because John Peoples was the only president not picked by IHL, he's the only president that has ever done right by us. So you, because I have my sources cited. So Mason had actually a blueprint about merging the schools, and that blueprint got out. Now, defenders of Mason, I want to be clear, because for those of you who don't know, the Jackson State alumni staff split on Mason. I need to be clear about this, because even in my article, I did talk about Mason was a great fundraiser. That is one thing I can't take from Mason. Mason was like Nixon. Money was flowing under Mason. However, the things about merging, and so when that template he had about being willing to merge, in fact, he not only was he willing to merge the schools, he had a name for the school. He was going to name it Jacob State University because he wanted to name it after one of the founders, the early founders of Natchez Seminary. So he had a whole plan of, and his justification was that instead of Mississippi having a big three, it'll be a big four. Because under that plan, Jackson State, Alcorn, and Valley was all going to become one university, right? So now, let me see. That he was a phenomenal fundraiser, but if I'm not mistaken, we were already at R2 before Mason got here. If I'm not, because Jackson State, if I'm not mistaken, is the second oldest R2 HBCU. There are only 11 HBCUs that are R2s. Howard was the first R2, and Jackson State was the second. if I'm not mistaken. I may need to check my fact on that. So I think we may have been in R2 before Mason got here, but I'm willing to be corrected on that with some fact finding. But he was a phenomenal, but the brother is right. Mason was a phenomenal fundraiser. Here's the other thing. Here's the other thing about Mason. And if you question, if you don't believe what I'm saying, right? Howard was first though. It was if you look at the ranking, it was Howard. I think Howard, us, and then North Carolina A&T. So, yeah, but I think I agree. The three are correct. The first three are correct. The first three are correct. Now, and I may be wrong on the order of the three, but the first he's absolutely correct. The first three are correct, right? So now the other thing is, I want everybody, when they get a chance, I want you to Google something. I want you to Google Ronald Mason and eminent domain. When you get a chance, because when I say this, people are going to say, no, that's cap. Along with the merger plan, Mason had to apologize to the black community around Jackson because he was helping Leland Speed. If you don't know who Leland Speed is a land baron. He became rich as a major racist land baron. President Mason had to apologize for working with Leland Speed to use eminent domain to take all the land from the black people around Jackson State. And if you think I'm lying, all you have to do is Google Mason and eminent domain, and there are 3 articles that will pop up with him actually apologizing for helping to use eminent domain, right? So that's the 4th time. So we've had 4 times in our history, right? We've had 4 times in our history that we have either been asked to merge or move. Because again, they've always seen Jackson State as a sleeping economic giant. You have to understand, going back to the Peoples, the school was supposed to never be anything more than a teacher's college. That is, we'll let y'all guys graduate black teachers. What Peoples was able to do is he was able to spend money wisely. So that even though he wasn't able to get extra money from the college board, he was able to save money and then take that money he saved and create other programs. Peoples is the reason you have a school of business and a school of computer science. All of that came, 75% of what you know as Jackson State is John A. Peoples. In fact, the last thing I want to say about that, People's details, and this is when we talk about, and this is why in the last article that I wrote, I wanted to give some props to Ken and Zoe, because they're doing what Peoples did. Check this out. Check out how Peoples was able to create different colleges. So in Jackson, there was this convent. They had a lot of nuns, and all these nuns had PhDs. Now, if you know anything about having a PhD, you have to have what's called continuing ed progress with your PhD to keep certain certifications. Peoples had programs, but he didn't have enough money for the teachers. So Peoples went over to the father, who was the head of the convent, and said, hey, you got these nuns that have these PhDs. I have these programs that need to be taught. Let's work something out where your nuns can come and get their continuing ed post credit. I don't have to pay as much. And that is the way Peoples was able to get different colleges accredited, by being innovative. New Hood. The reason New Hood dorm is called New Hood is because technically he went behind the college board back and got funding for that after begging IHL to give him money for. So it's Jackson Press 2000. So it's in that article. So that article in Jackson Press will tell you everything you need to know about Mason and eminent domain. So, and again, I'm not saying this because I want to be clear. Mason was a great fundraiser, and Mason had a lot of great ideas. But unfortunately, he allowed himself to get caught up in being willing to merge the 3 black colleges and letting Leland Speed, because Leland Speed actually had an office in the tower. So the most racist, heinous land baron had an office on the 7th floor under Mason's administration. So these things are not new. What we need to understand, however, is the work that all you guys on the screen are doing now. That's the work John A. Peoples did. At some point, we're going to have to understand that we're going to have to develop the economics, that when they deny us the political, we have the money to say we'll buy it ourselves. That's the one failure in our civil rights movement. That's our one failure.
That's correct.
Is that we never engaged, and we particularly never engaged Black power economics.
Oh my goodness.
And so let me say this, and then I'm gonna step on some toes, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying when I say this that people don't have a right to live where you want to live. I want to be clear about that. I made a conscientious choice. My wife and I live on Top Street, which is right around the corner. My 2 stepchildren went to Isabel, Blackburn, and Jim Hill, right? That's where my stepchildren went to school. We lived in West Jackson. We now live in Clinton because we were going to stay in Hinds County. I was not leaving Hinds County. But what every study shows us is this: white flight never kills a city. There's never been a time when white flight has killed the city. So the question is, if white flight doesn't kill the city, what kills the city? What kills the city is when the Black middle class leaves the city following the white flight.
Fact. That is a fact.
And so it's not the fact that white people think less of Black people. It's that Black people think less of Black people.
Well, where is Zoe when I need him right now?
Because what does Zoe say? We devalue Black things.
People devalue Black things. He say it all the time. That's his famous quote.